This is in response to James's post on Atheist Politics. Although I don't think I could actually go through all of my political beliefs, what I thought I might be able to do is explain why I'm not a Marxist. Although I can agree with James on certain points and agree with Marx as well on certain points, I don't think Marxism is a relevant theory for our time period, and I'm going to explain exactly why. I think the first thing that we have to do to understand Marx is understand the time period in which he is speaking. I'm going to set this up to say that although Marx can be found as a liberator of mankind, and that many of his theories do a lot to sort of raise our consciousness towards class struggle and towards the problems of poverty, that in a contemporary context we ultimately find these meaningless. Exploitation of women and children of the poor in this time period was ghastly. Here's some writing that I can find for you. William Wood, 9 years old, was 7 years old and 10 months when he began to work. He came to work every day in the week at 6 a.m. and left at about 9 p.m. 15 hours of labor for a child of 7 years old. That's from the official report of the Children's Employment Commission of 1863 in London. Other children were forced to start work at 4 a.m. or to work through the night until 6 a.m. And it was not unusual for children of only 6 years old to be forced to work a daily toll of 15 hours. Mary Ann Walkley had worked without pause for 26.5 hours, together with 60 other girls, 30 of them in one single room. A doctor, Mr. Kays, called in too late, testified before the coroner's jury that Mary Ann Walkley had died from long hours of work in a cramped room. Such were the conditions of the working class in 1863 when Marx wrote Das Kapital. His burning protest against these crimes, which were then tolerated and sometimes even defended, not only by professional economists, but also by churchmen, will secure his place forever among the liberators of mankind. I think that's an appropriate view to take of Marx, that he had tried very hard to rail against the sort of injustices that he had seen. But I can't give him the benefit of the doubt, and I can't credit him for some of the other problems that we see in his theory. For instance, I think we can look no further than James's explanation of a system of value, which is really at the core of Marx's belief. So let's take a minute to examine that.
Marx recognized that variable capital is responsible for the value of a commodity, just as an analogy kind of appropriately, I guess. If you give a blacksmith two identical amounts of steel and ask him to make one into horseshoes and the other into a suit of armor, you're going to pay more for the suit of armor, even if he ends up using less steel to do it, because the suit of armor requires more time and skill to make. Fixed capital is just that. The cost of steel is going to remain relatively similar across the market. One seller of steel may be able to compete with another by offering his steel at a slightly lower cost, but this difference of price isn't going to be enough to allow a company producing suits of armor to make a large profit, and profit is the point of capitalism. The cost of materials, the fixed capital, is passed on to consumers at cost, since in theory anyone could buy the materials and make the commodity themselves. The cost of labor is also passed on to the consumer, but to be able to make a profit, the only option for the capitalist is to underpay the labor force. And make no mistake, it is underpaying. Since the value is added to the commodity by the labor, the capitalist cannot pay the actual value of the labor.
So there we have Marx's theory of value explained brilliantly by James. It seems to be commonsensical, and it works well with the types of examples that he gave. It's also easy to see that in an industrial environment like the one Marx was working in and writing in, that he would see this type of theory of value as being an overarching sort of way of making sense of the Industrial Revolution. However, what I'm going to say that it sort of misapprehends extremely important and detailed parts of how economics actually works, and ultimately becomes anti-democratic when we writ this theory large. So why do I disagree with this? Well, I think fundamentally we have to understand Marx's theory of value as being an intrinsic theory of value. All this means is that the value of the product is conceived as being the value of the raw materials that we use to sort of form it and the labor that we use to manufacture such a good. We can contrast this with a subjectivist theory of value. This is the one that I would hold to. Now, subjectivist theories of value were present in Marx's time and were actually considered to be the sort of downfall of his theory. The best proponent, I would say, worth reading is David Ricardo, who really develops this theory broadly. Now, what the subjectivist theory of value would say is that the value of a product doesn't depend largely on the raw materials that we use or the amount of effort that we have to exert to create such a product, but rather what this value means to society in general. Now, what does this have to do with Marx? I'll bring that back into the discussion. Well, I think what that does for Marx is present sort of a problem, a big sort of problem. For Marx, that would indicate that his ideas of what is fair and what is valuable ultimately hinge on a misapprehension, a misconception of what value even is. And I can see this actually writ large with current economic theories of poverty, since that seems to be a contention of James. There are two systems by which we can see economic theories of what poverty is. The current one being used by organizations like World Health Organization and IMF, I believe, are based on the less than $1 metric. So anyone who makes or lives off of less than $1 a day is considered in poverty. However, if we take this subjective theory of value into consideration, we'd see that this isn't exactly a very good metric by which we can see what poverty actually is. We can contrast a theory of value that is based more around what people's actual needs are. This is developed around the economist Amartya Sen, who taught at Harvard University for years. Sen's idea of what creates value and what creates the circumstances by which people can not only survive but actually thrive are multidimensional. Human Development School have developed what they call a multidimensional view of poverty, and that takes into consideration the sort of subjectivist views of what it takes to survive, and it also takes in subjectivist views of what is valuable in a society. It doesn't do me very good to know that I'm in poverty at less than $1 a day if it takes $5 a day to survive. Our metrics won't actually add up to what reality really looks like. And I think a similar strain runs right through Marx. It's this idea that we can fundamentally look at value and see it as something only on the production side and not on the recipient side. Ultimately, I feel that this is anti-democratic. It takes away the ability of people to see for themselves what is valuable. It was a contention of Hayek in his book The Road to Serfdom that a command economy, or an economy controlled directly from government officials, would never be able to match up to these sort of subjectivist theories of value, because the delay in creating processes by which they can affect the economy is so large. I think that this actually presents the key problem for Marx. It presents a problem which I don't think any Marxist has ever adequately solved. Because they're always working with this subjectivist theory of value, they can't actually quite apprehend the problems that really affect poverty now, and work more with a standard model of to each according to their need and from each according to their ability, rather than seeing that needs are contingent upon parts of economic change which can't be adequately grasped from a command economy perspective. So I look forward to hearing what James's response is to this, if any. And I hope to get some comments and feedback onto the problems I see in Marxism.